Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Today we have a wonderful guest who's been very kind enough to join us on today's show, Sandy Edwards. I went to a seminar a few weeks ago in London, and I found it really, really fascinating. Sandy talked about her involvement in a clinical trial around energy healing and IBS, and I have the research paper in front of me here that she was involved in, and it's a pragmatic randomized controlled trial of healing therapy in gastroenterology outpatient setting. So this is the brief abstract to determine the benefits of healing therapy, spiritual healing, as adjacent to conventional management of irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel syndrome. So there were 200 outpatients according to the paper with IBS and IBD. It was a randomized trial, and it was run alongside my understanding from reading the paper, the patient's was run alongside the patient's treatment, and it's quite a fascinating paper if you get a chance to read it. So just the credits: Lee, Kingston, Roberts, Edwards, Downdish, Haig, and Singh. So Sandy, thank you for joining us on the show. It seems like a really fascinating trial. Can you tell us your involvement in the clinical trial, please, Sandy?
Well, I am. Oh, thank you first of all for inviting me to talk with you today. It's fascinating, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, to start with, I was a volunteer healer at a gastroenterology department, working with Dr. Sukhdev Singh at Good Hope Hospital in Birmingham, and I had volunteered to give healing to his patients after their consultation with him. This is outpatients. And in the very first few weeks, it was obvious that people were benefiting, even though they were highly skeptical. And many of them had never had any form of complementary therapy before, because I did ask that as just an icebreaker. It's only 5 steps from Dr. Singh's consultation room to the room that I use. It's right next door. So there's only a few seconds to speak with someone. And it was quite a surprise for people to be offered spiritual healing in a hospital situation and recommended by their consultant. This is a consultant physician and highly respected in his field. And with many gastro problems, there aren't many medicines and treatments that are available to help those conditions, particularly irritable bowel syndrome and ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. So Dr. Singh is always on the lookout for safe methods of adding to their care something that will help them. And he had actually sent 1 or 2 of his patients who were suffering for many years to our voluntary healing group. And it was through that I realized that he could be open to the idea of having a volunteer working with his patients at the hospital. So within a few weeks of me starting there, I began auditing the results of people. I asked for permission and developed a questionnaire. And from that, it became obvious just how incredible some of the results were with people, and how even just one 20-minute session, which was all I was giving, was helping people even a week later. There was a 1 week later form. And those audits, the results of 200 and something patients I did in the end with audits, those results are on the internet. And those contributed towards this research trial, because the funding came from the National Lottery. Just a couple of months after I started work at the hospital, the National Lottery announced funding for research programs for health trials where funding would be difficult to get from anywhere else. And that ticked all of our boxes. It's very difficult to get research money for spiritual healing, as you can imagine. And now my audits showed that people did want healing, and they did find benefit from just one 20-minute session. So there were hundreds and hundreds of applications for this research funding, but we were so lucky. We gave, well, I say lucky, it was hard work on behalf of Dr. Singh, who brought together the necessary partners, and the University of Birmingham which is a top UK university equivalent to Ivy League in the States, led the program. And it has to be the largest in the world, because before you start a trial, you have to search worldwide for anything else that's similar, so you're not doing the same thing again unnecessarily. So there was nothing that even touched this scale, and certainly not with IBS and ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. So that was how I became involved, and I was on the steering group for the trial from the outset. But when it came to recruiting healers for it, I then had to line up with anybody else who applied, and I was interviewed alongside anyone else. And luckily, I was employed to be part of one of the healers on the trial. There were 3 main healers. I generally saw anybody who had a morning appointment. Another girl had the afternoon appointments, and a man had the evening appointments. But there were also backup healers, so that if we couldn't make an appointment, then they were brought in, so people didn't have to miss their weekly sessions. The patients themselves were suffering for a very long time with these problems. Irritable bowel syndrome, 100 patients in that group, and IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, which includes ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. And so that makes 3 groups, really, because ulcerative colitis and Crohn's are different but very, very similar. They're both IBDs. So those groups, irritable bowel syndrome, there's no physical issue with any part of their body, but their symptoms are real and very painful and debilitating and embarrassing. So all of those descriptors also apply to inflammatory bowel disease. But inflammatory bowel disease, they do have ulcers and lesions in their bowels that cause the pain, the discomfort, the symptoms. And it affects every aspect of life, whether it's IBS or IBD. It affects their work life, their social life, their sex life, their everything. And when some people can't go out because they need to know where every toilet is on their path, on their journey in a day's trip, you know, there's some people can't even leave the house. It's whatever can be done to help these people. And because there's no medical cure for either one, why not explore what else might help them? And so Dr. Singh arranged this trial by getting the necessary partners together, and each person was to have 5 healing sessions. They're only half-an-hour appointments, 20 minutes it takes to do a healing session. Each one of the healers was trained and members of the Healing Trust, which gives very good quality healer training. And the quality of healer training is important here. There's lots of different types of healing, and so long as the healer training is good quality, that's what's important. Doesn't matter whether it's Reiki or therapeutic touch or any other name, so long as the quality of the training is excellent. That's the main point here. But for this trial, I wanted only Healing Trust members, so that it was the same method, the same training, the same code of conduct, same professional standards. So the patients then had 5 half-an-hour sessions, 1 a week for 5 weeks. And of these patients, the 100 IBS and the 100 IBD, they were divided into 2 equal groups. And one group, so 50 IBS people, 50 IBD people, began their healing sessions straight away. And the other half had to wait for 3 months before they could begin their healing sessions. That meant that the researchers were able to compare the results of those who had received the healing with those that hadn't for those 3 months. And the questionnaires were completed again at week 24. That's 6 months later. So now we would know whether there was an instant response straight away after the healing sessions, or a little while later, halfway through the program, and at the end in 6 months' time. So 24 weeks, that's 6 months, isn't it? So the first group then had their healing sessions in the first 5 weeks, and then the questionnaires were at week 0 to see how they were in all respects before starting healing. Then week 6, which was straight after their last healing session. So healing sessions were week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then week 6 was the questionnaire to see how they'd fared immediately after their series of 6 sessions. Then another one at week 12. So that's 9 weeks, 7 weeks after their last healing session, to see if any improvements, if there were any, had been retained. And then another set of the questionnaires at week 24 to see if any changes had been retained for the full length of the program. Then if they had benefited, those benefits could have remained for longer or forever, who knows. But our program was for 6 months to see what the results were. The whole program took 2 years, because you can't do everybody in the first week. People being recruited along the way. And initially, it was only going to be ulcerative colitis people in the IBD group, but it's more rare than IBS, so there weren't enough people to populate the trial with just ulcerative colitis. So we then had to include Crohn's disease, and there's even less people, even fewer people, I should say, with Crohn's. So it now made 3 different groups, really. So the results then were measured by, first of all, a questionnaire called MIMOPS, which measures quality of life. It doesn't measure the symptoms for IBS or IBD or any other thing. The main focus of the program was to see whether adding healing to patients' usual conventional care would improve their life. Improving lives was the main point. So the main questionnaire is called MIMOP, Measure Your Own Performance. And on that questionnaire, the scale of points, the way it works is that a patient needs to have a 1 whole point reduction in points to show that there was a clinical significance to their improvement. And a clinical significance means that it's noticeable by the patient. Things have definitely improved in a way that they can tell. And so after week 6, on that MIMOP, both groups, IBS and IBD, reduced by 1 whole point. So that's amazing. That's fantastic. And by week 12, so that's 7 weeks after their final healing session, both groups reduced by another full point. So healing was continuing to do its work way after the last healing session. Then the next questionnaire was at week 24, so that's a further 3 months later. And you would think maybe the benefits would have dissipated, and indeed they did, but only by 1 point. So they were still, although the points had gone back up, it was still that those patients were 1 full point less than when they began. Did I get that? Was that clear?
No, that's
a bit complicated in description.
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely. That's really interesting, Sandy, and you've explained it well. In research, study results are deemed statistically significant if they are unlikely to have occurred by chance. So tests for statistical givens are used to estimate the probability of a relationship in the observed data only by chance. So let's say, for example, in plain English, if I was to say, when I get up in the morning, I have a green juice, and an hour later I have a cup of coffee, and my productivity is 100% better than what it is when I don't. So anecdotally, I could say that. and I can sort of provide some evidence of that when I have the green juice and coffee, when I don't have. But empirically, we need to set a significance level to see if there's other variables or other correlations that have an impact on productivity. So it could be, did I sleep well? It could be, did I listen to music? Did we go for a walk? So there are many variables in one sense. And I thought it was quite fascinating, the actual paper itself. And I'm sort of going to draw attention to the paper because I don't want to get anything wrong. So sort of reiterating what you said there, there was a significant improvement in the MIMOC score at week 6. So the statistical significance level is a p-value of 0.001. And because of time, and you know, we could sort of cover this for the next however many hours, but we, you know, time is of the essence. So we'll do as much as we can in the time we've got, just to sort of give people a bit of an indication. So if the significance level is 0.5, just a bit of a lesson in statistics. I don't want to put everyone to sleep. If it's 0.05, then it's a 1 in 20 chance, then whatever it is that it was, that, okay, so the 1 in 20 chance, the coffee and the green juice, in this sort of analogy, of being wrong or of supporting the hypothesis. If we sort of go to 0.01, then it's slightly different. Then it's a 1 in 100 chance. If we go to 0.0001, it's 1 in 1,000 chance of being wrong. So the statistical significance is pretty set pretty high in one sense. So I think from what I can see, it was 200 participants. So it's a reasonably you know, good size sample too, so it's got, you know, reasonably good statistical power. Obviously, in an ideal world, you could test everybody in the world, but that's not practical. We don't have the technology to do that at this moment in time. But that would be the ideal scenario. Maybe we can do that in 100 years. But at the moment, we've got what we've got. But I think for me, the statistics data, and I encourage people to read the paper. And without going into less into statistical data, I just want to sort of highlight a couple of things there, which I think are important in one sense. So I think people at this point are probably wondering, and you mentioned there, I think you drew attention to it, okay, so you talked about Reiki and other things too, but they're probably wondering out there what a healer does, Sandy. So just to give us a bit of an idea in terms of what a healer does in that environment, because the sessions are like 20-30 minutes, I think you mentioned there, and I read in the paper. So what goes on in those 20 or 30 minutes? That's what I really find fascinating. Yeah, I think that's really fascinating stuff.
It is fascinating. I'm not trained to train, of course, but I can, the way I find I do healing is to focus on being as brilliantly positive as I can muster, and then by connecting with the patient, I'm helping them to reach my level of exhilaration and excitement and positive energy. And just by doing that, the patient, I believe, entrains to that higher vibration, and through that people benefit. And the benefits that are mentioned throughout the whole of this trial isn't just upliftment, it's pain relief, mobility, less symptoms, fewer symptoms, feeling more empowered, all positive things. There were 2 research papers that went into medical journals. One was the physical responses, I suppose one could say, the measurable, quantitative, that's the word I'm looking for, quantitative, where you can actually measure the things. And the second paper was a qualitative study, where 22 people were selected to be interviewed to see what they had to say about the program, their experience. And it reiterated all the things that healers hear after a healing session or feedback later, where they've these patients actually are highly skeptical, generally speaking. Hospital patients, I've found, are highly skeptical. They've often have said to me, there's no way that healing can help me. I need more medication, that's all. But after a healing session, they realize that there's something else happening, and some responses have been dramatic after just one healing session. One of the guys on this trial, there is no medical cure for ulcerative colitis, but one of the case studies that I mentioned in my book, this is my book here, that explains the research results and the trial and things about healing in a more easy, readable format. And actually, I do cover a lot more than the research trial expresses. I think I've found as much meaning from the research papers as possible, but I'll revisit that if I decide to write another book. This was a lot of work. So where did I get to? I was saying about the research
the quality data, yeah.
Oh yes, so the quantitative results reiterated, underpinned everything that was in the quantitative study.
Yes,
so that's called triangulation in research terms, where you use a completely different method to find results. Also another thing, the way the trial was run, half the patients began their healing at the beginning, and the other half started theirs halfway through the program, week 12. So at week 12, they completed questionnaires again to see that there was any difference from week 0, those 12 weeks while they were waiting. And generally speaking, they remained the same or not much different. So that was 12 weeks of continuing with their conventional care. But then they had their 5 healing sessions, and the results showed that they followed the same pattern of improvement as the intervention group, the ones who had healing from the beginning. So that doubly confirmed the results of the first group. And of those results, interestingly, the Crohn's groups, so there was a Crohn's group of 12 only people that had their sessions from the beginning, and another group of 12 that waited 3 months before they started theirs. Both groups reached beyond the level that is considered as remission for Crohn's, which is very impressive. But because it's a small group in research terms, only 24 people, it isn't convincing in research terms. But if I had Crohn's, I would go for that series of healing sessions and see what happens. I know what I was going to say about in my book. There's one guy who's got ulcerative colitis, did have, and he had 5 sessions on the research trial. Those were all with me, as it turned out. And after the trial had been completed, it so happened that he came for checkups with Dr. Singh and was able to have another 5 sessions periodically, not any particular routine to it, with me after the trial had been completed. And he became of a certain age where he was having colon tests papers come through the post. It's a normal thing once men get to a certain age. So he filled in one of those medical tests, and the results came back with something unusual. So he had to go for a colonoscopy. He was very worried because he thought that it might be cancer, which it could have been. Once you've had ulcerative colitis, there's much more risk of cancer. But he felt that he was much better than he had been, so he was very disappointed. But he did go for the colonoscopy, and the evidence from that showed that he no longer had ulcerative colitis at all. He had something else, but it was minor in comparison, and the whatever it was that flagged it up for him to go for a colonoscopy, it wasn't right anyway. So whatever he went for, it was fine. So that just showed that he no longer had ulcerative colitis at all. So again, if I had ulcerative colitis, first thing I'd be doing, in addition to conventional treatment, you need both, I think. Just go with both. And but why not have healing sessions, even if you don't believe in them? Most people who had healing at the hospital did not believe in it at all.
Yeah.
Very different people who come to our healing
Great
groups.
point.
So those people who come for healing at the healing groups, they're expecting something beneficial.
Of course, yeah, and they're going to look for it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a really good point, Sandy. I think that you made a great point there, especially in the quality of the data, where, albeit the research needs to meet strict ethical guidelines, and that would have gone through a protocol and sort of volunteered to be there. It probably, in terms of the skepticism, they still made one would hypothesize there's a higher degree of skepticism amongst patients who've not come across healing before than, say, someone who decides they want to go see a healer. Because if you decide you're going to see a healer and you know a bit about it, there's that sort of confirmation bias. You'll look for any sign, whatever that sign might be. But if it's being delivered to you, then that skepticism is still going to be there. But also you've got the quality and the quantity of data. So, you know, on both ends of the spectrum there. And I think for me too, I think what's really important too, Sandy, we talk healing, and I've experienced that I have one foot in both camps. I can be very spiritual, but I'm quite scientific too, and sort of somewhere in the middle. I think for me, it's the non-intrusiveness where, you know, you're not getting, you know, something forced down your throat. You can go along if it's for you, great. If it's not, you know, and that's the beauty, I think, about this sort of energy healing, because it's not intrusive. There's no real risk. You go there, if it's for you, great. If it's not, then you can walk away, and that's fine too. And I think, you know, just being in that moment can be a useful thing, and having someone around you with that sort of positive vibration can be a good thing, wonderful thing. But like you mentioned, I think it's really important that, you know, one is not saying it's a substitute for medical care. Obviously, medical care is important, and I'm certainly not making any suggestions that people, you know, go down that road or the other road. Of course, you know, always seek medical advice for any condition. But I think for me, if we sort of, in the conclusion of the paper, which is quite interesting, the conclusion says the probatic trial demonstrates the patient benefit is accrued through the addition of healing therapy to conventional management of IBS and IBD. The greatest benefit was observed in individuals with IBS, where differences would confer clinical determinable benefit were observed. The benefit observed may at least be in part, well, they suggest here that it may be in part a placebo effect, although the size of the benefits observed suggests an alternative mechanism. So, okay, you could hypothesize it might be placebo, but equally the size. If it was 1 or 2 people, 10 people, you might say, okay, it's more likely, there's a stronger chance of being, we can never rule things out, placebo, but the sheer size, I think, and the paper highlights that the sheer size will suggest alternative mechanisms, and the value of any mechanism should arguably not be discounted where it confers sympathetic relief. So I think for me, if it's providing people with relief and they feel better on that scale, then what I think for me, and these are my words, this is my opinion, I think that they should consider a follow-up trial in other areas too. Now, I know funding isn't easy to come by, but equally, for me, I think science has more questions than answers. And I really believe that we need to put the client, the patients first, in the sense that if we've seen impressive data, I think it certainly at least needs to be considered, and maybe look at other conditions too and see what we can do here, because really, okay, we talk the expense of the trial. You know, what price do we put on people feeling better? And in my mind, the expense of the trial is a drop in the ocean, really. One could argue that that allocation of money could go elsewhere, and certainly pharmaceutical companies invest heavily and they make profit and reinvest. And that's out there. That's not me saying it. People can do their own research. I'm not against pharmaceuticals. They do what they do, and I'm not medically qualified to comment on that. But from a mind point of view, that's my area. I'd like to think that there's enough here to at least let's go forward and see, is there any follow-up? Have you sort of been in touch with anyone? Are they sort of considering at least any follow-up trials, saying anything like that, or you know of anything that they might?
I'm not aware of any, no. And it was so magical that this money became available. It never has been before, and the lottery said it never will be again. So we have to make the very most out of this research. And this research shows that it's beneficial for people who've got IBS and IBD, but it's said that a lot, not just said, it is known that a lot of other conditions begin in the gut. So this research is relevant to a great many more swathes of people and conditions. And also another thing that we found subsequent to the trial, through Dr. Singh speaking to his patients, was that none of those patients, hardly any of those patients, were willing to receive healing in any other place than at his clinic or within the hospital or within the NHS. They wouldn't go to our voluntary healing group. Every time I gave a healing session to a patient, I gave them a leaflet for our voluntary healing group. So if they wanted more, they could go there. Tiniest few people ever went. They would have a session with me if they knew it would be me, but I never went to the healing group anymore because the number of hours I was doing at the hospital was all the voluntary work time I was, willing and able to do. So another aspect of that was, what was another point that you raised there? There was some other things I was going to address that you mentioned. Can't think now. You covered so many points, and I was going to respond to so many. But it didn't matter to the researchers what the reason was that people benefited. It was pragmatic in that any hospital, any doctor's surgery can add healing to whatever they're doing. It doesn't affect the conventional care that patients are having. This is in addition. So it's pragmatic. It can be used by any NHS outlet. So patients need to be making their doctors aware that they want this therapy, and doctors need to be more open-minded to have it in their surgery or their clinics for people to accept. Also, in the UK, we have this mindset that we don't need to pay for any medical help because for NHS, everything's paid for. So nobody expects to pay for their healthcare in the UK. And so no money changes hands in a hospital or a doctor's surgery, usually. But there are doctors who've had healers working in their surgeries for decades, and they have a private arrangement with the healers who work there. So the patients pay a nominal fee to the healers, but the healers have a room that they use within the doctor's surgery, and that's very successful. So there are ways that it can be done.
No, for sure. I was going to say, I think the thing is to, Sandy, I would think that the stigma, albeit changing considerably, more and more people are open-minded now. I believe that science has taken us to an edge of the pier. I think science has gone so far. We're at the edge of a pier, but there's an ocean that we don't know. And with technology, we're going to learn more and more, and things are sort of rapidly learning more. But we don't have the, we know too much to say this is the only way. We know too little to discount anything, in the sense that we've got to have an open mind, because there's a lot that we know, but there's a lot we don't know too. And I think for me, it is a brave trial, in my opinion, because I think that it leaves an openness for, I wouldn't just say criticism, but certainly, at least my perception is there still is a stigma, if not just in the UK, but generally in the Western world, around healing for one reason or the other. But equally, I think I'd say most healers I've come across are genuine people who do it because they enjoy doing it, and from a financial point of view, they don't make a great deal. But everyone's got to eat. We've got to live. We live in the capitalist world, and you don't go to the store and people give you food for free, and bills have got to be paid, and so on and so forth. So I can fully appreciate that people need, like any profession, in that respect. But I think the thing would be, was there any sort of stigma around the trial, what was going on? Was there sort of any sort of, I wouldn't say negativity, but people didn't really know what was going on, and were there any comments that were made? Or?
No, I didn't have any negative feedback at all. When you have, there were no side effects, of course, and so that confirmed that the healing that we do is doesn't cause any harm, which is like a primary thing for the Hippocratic Oath.
Yes,
and because with a trial, you have time to read what it is about, what you're going to be, I would say, what it's called subjected to, but you're not subjected to anything in a healing session. It's totally enjoyable. And that's something that came across very strongly with the interviews that were conducted for the qualitative study, that everybody enjoyed those healing sessions. One person actually, I'd never heard of this before, where one person found it uncomfortable, but she felt it was really, that wasn't me. I've never heard of it myself until the research results came out. But even that lady enjoyed, she felt that it was for her benefit, and indeed it was ultimately. So she came back for each session. She really, really appreciated the healer. They got on really very well. So it's very positive in all respects.
Fantastic. And from the outside, like the outside world, so to speak, what was the feedback outside the actual study itself? I mean, I'm sure the study would have attracted attention in the media, possibly other universities.
I did hope that we'd be able to get this into the newspapers, but that has been in the main newspapers. But that has been a struggle. It doesn't seem as though they're interested, really.
That's a shame.
It is a shame. I suppose they want something more dramatic, but this is dramatic for people's lives, actually. There was one lady, there's a lot of responses that aren't mentioned in the research papers. The detail in the MyMOC questionnaires would have been very interesting, and it would be wonderful if another team of healers another team of researchers came and used that initial data for other research papers to come out of that same data. That is what normally happens, because it takes a lot of time to gather all that information. The MyMOC questionnaires would have more detail about what other ways these healing sessions improved their lives. And one example I had, just from not one of the trial patients, but this is an example of just one lady who I've mentioned in my book, where she had a healing session after her consultation with Dr. Singh. And many months later, she came back for a checkup with Dr. Singh, and as a result, had another healing session with me. I didn't recognize her because I see hundreds of patients there. I was a volunteer healer there for 7 years, every week on a Wednesday morning. And so that's a lot of patients to see. But she said, and she was, she looked like an ordinary person, you know, like she would work in, be a teacher or an executive or something like that. I mean, she seemed very well dressed, well spoken. But it turned out that she told me that after that healing session she'd had before, she found that she had the courage to go and learn to read and write, which is a life changer. And it's very touching when people smash through their fears like that after just 20 minutes, a lifetime fear. And it was only fear that was holding her back, or something was holding her back that was melted away in that 20 minutes. So it is incredible.
Really
and that's not the only example, of course, and there's many in my book. But the thing for squeezing the pips out of this research is for it to become well known. And we now have the facility of Facebook or whatever other internet communication that individuals have. So anybody who hears of this research can pass it around to all their contacts on the internet. and get it well known that way. And amongst those, there are, I know, gastroenterology consultants getting to hear about it in that way, from individuals spreading this news around their own contacts. And those consultants are spreading it around other consultants and GPs. I had another GP call me yesterday saying how intrigued she was by this whole research that she's run across on the internet. And the word is getting about, but the more we do, the better it is. We need to make the very most of this research. And if we were to do more research, that would be another number of years from the moment that I mentioned this research opportunity to Dr. Singh through to the time that it became published officially in medical journals. 10 years had gone by. That's it. If we were to search for more funding to do another trial, we've got to get another team of researchers who are willing to do the work. And we were so blessed that everybody on the steering group, that's the researchers and everybody involved, all remained in place for the duration of this trial. Now, that rarely happens, it seems. There's a lot of research funding that begins a trial, but it doesn't get finished, it doesn't get published.
Of course,
so I am totally thrilled that this has actually reached its final stage, completed. But it took 2 years, I think it was, to get published in medical journals. One medical journal that's well known to people wrote back and said no, they wouldn't publish it because their members don't subscribe to complementary therapies, which for a scientific journal, that is not a scientific reason to reject it. And I do know people, individuals myself, who pride themselves on being scientific, but they won't look at the evidence to make a proper decision. It's not an informed decision if you're not going to read the research. You're not going to read. My book shows, oh, I know what it was I was going to mention before when you were talking about placebo. I've devoted a section of my book to the placebo. It is a fantastic thing to have on our side for recovery. But these people on the research trial had very often not long seen their consultant, and the ones with Dr. Singh would have had the maximum placebo effect because he's so empathetic with his patients. So I'm sure that the maximum possible through medical methods would be already in place before they received healing from me or the other healers on the trial. But many of the research papers that I've quoted in my book, I've done included about 200 citations in my book, a lot of work that was, and many of them refer to trials on plants, animals, seeds, and all of those cannot include placebo effect. Animals and plants can't have an opinion about whether they think it'll work or not. So that negates the placebo effect. But even if it were all placebo effect, who would care? If your symptoms are reduced or even gone, and you're feeling empowered and better in yourself, why? What does it matter what the actual dynamics are?
Yeah, no, I agree. From the perspective of the patient, if you improve, then so be it. I guess nothing's 100%. Any empirical research, and that goes for anything. Anything. There's always correlations, and things are generally multifactorial. My mind is no profession has disciplinary imperialism where if there is a tendency of some people from particular backgrounds, academic backgrounds, want to claim a privileged view of health behaviour. And I think for me, no one is 100% because these things are multifactorial. We can't rule things out. Certainly in the case of the trial here, it may well have been placebo, but from the point of view of the patient, if you feel better, then so be it. But then again, it's unlikely, based on the size of the trial, that it would have been purely placebo. It might have been for one or two, because you think about the size of the trial, it'd be very unlikely, in my opinion, to be placebo for every single person. But equally, like all these things, it's only sensible to not rule anything out. And that for me would suggest that further research would be would be of benefit to all people. But equally, each person has their own opinion, and I think that, generally speaking, and I'm not a medical person, by the way, I stress that, but in the medical field, I would the implications would point towards biological reductionism. Where, okay, they'll look at the biology, and that's okay, that's fine to do that, and generally there'll be a sort of biological process. If you're going to see a psychologist for, say, IBS, then they might look at your appraisal of situations where you become stressed and the stomach might tighten up and so on and so forth. A nutritionist might say that it's down to too much gluten or sugary foods. A sociologist might say it's down to the environment you're in, causing you stress and food. And I suppose all these things, for me, I don't think there's one right or wrong answer. We're all going to see it from our own perspective. But I would say it would make a lot of sense to me to say, okay, the patient comes first. Let's all sit around the table and have a sensible discussion about what we can do and what we can bring to the table. We won't always be in agreement with all things, but we can sort of talk things through. And great people like yourself who have got their heart in the right place and want to help people. Great people like the researchers involved in the program that obviously are genuine and want to get it out there to help people. It would make a lot of sense to me to come together and say, what, there is mileage here, and if this works this well in this environment, could it work in other environments? Because there is literature out there that I've read that's really fascinating about spontaneous remissions and things like that, really, that you can't really explain through science, but it happens, and it's not the norm, but it does happen. I think as long as it does happen, even if it's 1 in a million, to me, it's worth sort of pursuing and looking at. But in a trial as such, the one you were involved with, I think that the empirical research, the data speaks for itself. And I think, if nothing else, for me, it's not saying do this or do that. For me, it's not saying, well, here it is. Have a read and make your own mind up what you do with it. Certainly, nothing is a substitute or implying for medical help. If one is, not well, then go see your GP or whoever you decide to see. But equally, in saying that, it would make logical sense to me that this could work.
Yes.
Perhaps it might be an idea to go down that road as well as. But it's an amazing trial you're involved in. I think it's really groundbreaking. I think this will sort of it's in its infancy. It will get traction. It's a shame that the conventional media hasn't, in my opinion, gone into more detail, because there are people out there that I'm sure could benefit. And if one person benefits more than, if one person feels better as a result, then so be it. That's a big thing for me. So I certainly think that it's been great to speak to you, and I think the work you did, the hard work you guys put in to produce this data over that sort of time frame is remarkable and fantastic.
Thank you. The talking about the how high quality research this is, each one of the patients completed 3 different questionnaires: the MIMOP, quality of life questionnaire specific to their condition, and then also a symptoms questionnaire specific to their condition. And so the MIMOP results were brilliant, and the medical acceptable level of what they're aiming for in statistics with pharmaceutical or any other kind of medical treatment is 0.05 that you mentioned. And so I'll just put a little thing of 0.05. Right. So that's 1 in 20 chances of it happening by chance. But the results were by chance. And our MIMOP ones were 1 in 1,000. The smaller the number, the better it is. So that's 1 in 1,000. That's highly significant. And the other 2 questionnaires that were used, although they weren't the same results because they're different questions, they were in keeping. They supported the findings of the MIMOP one. So that's 2,400 questionnaires included in the trial. And a university like the University of Birmingham, is going to be sure to avoid any kind of criticism of their research, because they're world-class players. So
of course, yeah.
The results of this trial as well were expressed with 95% certainty that any other trial run exactly the same way would get the same results, or similar results.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's very high quality. You couldn't get better than this research, and it is the largest trial in the world, I'm absolutely sure, because the search they had to do before starting this trial didn't find anything that anywhere near this size for this kind of thing. So I'm thoroughly impressed, that excited that it came about, and it isn't finished yet as regards getting this into the newspapers. I'm still plugging away and hoping that we do get some good coverage. There is a documentary that we've been filmed for towards that, and that may come onto the television screen one day. Who knows? It's you can never know until contracts are signed. But that's a film by Dina Barnett, and it's all about healing, different kinds of healing, but it does feature this research, which is exciting. That's
fascinating stuff. So I want to thank you very much, Sandy, for your time coming on board. Is there any way that people can contact you, having for people to contact you to sort of know a bit more about what you do, and yeah? I have a website that doesn't tell you very much really, but it lets you know about my book.
Yes. And if you just Google healing in a hospital, scientific evidence that spiritual healing improves health, or just my name, Sandy Edwards, and to healing in a hospital, and that should bring something up. But the main one for information about the healing would be to go to the national organisation that I trained with, which is the Healing Trust. Go to their website, and that should give you all the information you need. And also they have voluntary healing groups like the one I set up in Warsaw that are dotted all around the country, and support groups for people who are training to be healers with them. The training is very good quality, and I would recommend it for anyone who's caring for others, even if they only do the beginning of the training, the first course or two. It trains people who are caring for others not to give away their own energy, or take on the symptoms of the people they're helping. If you feel drained after working, say as a nurse, a doctor, a surgeon, a teacher, anybody in caring professions, you're helping other people, or a private person in your own home caring for a loved one, retaining the integrity of your own energy is vital for you to remain healthy, to carry on doing what you do. And the more energized and positive that any of us can feel within our own selves, the better it is for ourselves and for those around us, and for our neighborhood, and for our country, and for our whole world. So the more that all of us can entrain to a higher level of vibration, which is what healing really does, in my belief, then, and I think in all healers' beliefs, that it's better for everything, better for our own health, better for everyone else's upliftment and joy. The more joy we can bring to the world, the better it is. Precisely. No, my exact sentiments, I think so, for sure. So thanks again, Sandy. I really appreciate you coming on board the show, and no doubt I'll keep an eye out for your work, and you know, fantastic to come on board, and do keep in touch. I'll certainly keep an eye out for other work that you do. Thanks again, Sandy. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's wonderful.